Welcome to this week's episode of the Sports Biz Report. I'm Kevin Rossi, and I'll be presenting on sports media, joined by Kevin Murray, presenting on sports law, and Mike Proska, presenting on sports marketing. Later in the show, we will be joined by Dr. Ellen Staurowsky, professor of sport management at Drexel University. She's done a multitude of things within college sports, lots of research and scholarly work there, and she will be talking to us about the scandal at Rutgers, because we can't seem to not talk about it anymore. So first for the roundup. In sports media this week, Awful announced that Keith Olbermann is back in sports, formerly with ESPN, and also did some political work at Current TV. Olbermann will be taking over a spot in the studio for TBS Baseball. So it's good to see Olbermann back in sports. Lots of strong opinions. He's a very polarizing figure, so sure to be some buzz around that. Next, from Awful announcing and the big lead, Mike Hill will be leaving ESPN for Fox Sports 1, reportedly. Hill is the radio host, the Hill half of Hill and Schlereth on ESPN Radio, and he's also done a little bit of TV work on SportsCenter. I mean, he's a pretty good radio guy. I remember him on TV, and he was pretty good. So that's a big hire for Fox Sports 1. They'll probably keep him on the radio because that seems to be where he wants to be right now.
And I think it's a good move for him because at ESPN Radio, he's like the third in command in terms of shows with Mark Schlereth. So I think it'll be good to see where he goes on Fox Sports
1. The show is being rebranded Schlereth and Company.
Really?
So they're getting really creative here.
That sounds terrible.
Exactly. On SBJ this week, they had an article about Fox Sports 1 selling tweets to advertisers. The piece by John Oren took a look at how the network will have a strategy majorly ingrained in Twitter, mainly around big events that they host, and also the Super Bowl. The network launch is August 17th. And in golf news, the exclusive negotiating window for ESPN and NBC Sports has begun for rights on the U.S. Open, Women's U.S. Open, and Senior Open. Currently, the three properties bring in about $35 to $38 million to the USGA. The last deal was 9 years for the three, so look for something within that window, whether it's ESPN, NBC, or maybe Fox Sports will sneak in there, although Fox has never had golf before. So that's it for sports media. Now over to Kevin Murray and sports law.
So first, quite an interesting topic that continues to unravel. On Tuesday, Deshaun Jackson announced that he would be firing Drew Rosenhaus as his agent. Drew Rosenhaus has been his agent since he entered the NFL. And most recently negotiated a new contract for Deshaun, Philadelphia Eagles, which is 5 years, $51 million. So the rumors are today that Deshaun Jackson is interested in signing with Jay-Z and his new sport label, Rock Nation. This could be a kill two birds with one stone move for Jackson, as he could possibly advance his rap career and his own label, Jackpot Records, spelled Jaccpot.
This is all a joke, right?
No, this is completely real.
No, this is an Onion headline, I swear.
No, this is completely real. So then also today, Rosenhaus came out and claimed that he will be filing a grievance against Deshaun Jackson for $400,000 in unpaid loans that Rosenhaus signed off on for him between 2009 and 2012. Yeah, so I don't really know. It'd be interesting to see if he's the next addition onto Rock Nation, based off of where Jay-Z has been focusing. He's kind of a big ego compared to the other names that Jay-Z has signed. So, I don't know, it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, definitely a little more babysitting than some of the other ones required with Deshaun Jackson.
Yeah. Alex Rodriguez refuses to make comment regarding statements made by Tony Bosch, who was the founder and former chairman of Biogenesis America. The clinic in South Florida linked to performance-enhancing drugs in Major League Baseball and other non-major sports, but small-level professional sports. Okay, the clinic has been attached to players such as Alex Rodriguez and Ryan Braun, and possibly 20 other big-name MLB athletes. Apparently, Bosch had requested Alex Rodriguez's financial support after Major League Baseball filed a lawsuit against him in March. When Rodriguez wouldn't pay him, reportedly, Bosch went to the MLB and divulged all of his knowledge. The amount of money that Bosch was requesting from Alex Rodriguez is apparently in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
So about 3 innings of A-Rod's contract.
3 innings of A-Rod sitting on the bench.
Yes,
So,
sorry.
in exchange for his cooperation, apparently the MLB will be dropping the suit against Bosch. So all of this is, apparent as nobody is really coming out and making statements about it because it's still ongoing. But throughout this week and weekend, make sure you pay attention to what's going on because this could have huge implications on Major League Baseball coming up to the All-Star break. It could be a really big, groundbreaking release if they come out and announce 20-25 players' names as being connected to performance-enhancing drugs. The commissioner's office has been a source of the commissioner's office has said that the commissioner would be seeking 100-game suspension penalties for all players linked to the biogenesis clinic. So, as you may know, 100 games is currently the suspension for a second offense with performance-enhancing drugs. So even if these athletes don't have previous first offenses, apparently they'll be shooting for 100 games.
I mean, who does C-League think he's like David Stern or something?
Apparently.
The Balco guys didn't get extra games because they were in Balco. I understand the suspension for like a failed drug test, but for being linked to biogenesis warranting another 50 games, that's not going to stand. An arbitrator will not let that stand.
Especially since that this is all because A-Rod wouldn't pay for Tony Bosch's legal fees. This information may have never hit Major League Baseball had it not been for that. So.
Yeah, and I mean, in this case, I'm inclined to say let the process go. But the fact that none of the players have publicly come out and discredited Bosch's credibility here, I think says a lot towards how guilty they really are. Because, I mean, if you look at Bosch is kind of obviously in a position of power here, he can kind of do whatever he wants and people will believe him.
They're not taking it seriously.
Caught.
Yeah, but they're kind of like deer in headlights.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to follow where this goes throughout the rest of the Major League Baseball season. I mean, these suspensions could really mean a lot for pennant races. It wouldn't really affect the Yankees considering the fact that A-Rod doesn't play anyway, but could affect some other major teams.
The Yankees will probably look for a way out of his contract. I don't know if there's a legal way out. That's kind of up for debate.
The Yankees would love to get out of A-Rod's contract. Anybody would love to get out of A-Rod's contract right now.
It's not team friendly, I would say.
No. All right. So today, it was announced that a federal judge in Pennsylvania, Yvette Kane, has thrown out the lawsuit that Governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Corbett, filed against the NCAA. Kane called Corbett's argument a Hail Mary pass that easily warranted dismissal. So this is kind of an interesting, terminology to use because people from the beginning questioned Corbett's, realistic connection to this situation and why exactly he was the one backing this lawsuit. Well, at that time there had been no Paterno lawsuit, which more recently, just last week was announced. There had been no real Penn State lawsuit. Just as a little background, this lawsuit came out towards the end of the summer. This lawsuit was to overturn the $60 million, fine, 4 years of bowl ban and scholarship limits and other penalties put onto Penn State following the Sandusky scandal. So we'll see what happens at Penn State as we move along.
Professor O'Brien on top of it from the beginning.
Yeah,
he was saying all along, Corbett doesn't have the legal standing to bring suit, and look what happened. Great. Thank you, Kevin. Now over to Mike Proska with sports marketing.
All right, so the first topic I want to talk about is college sports and Disney. The Disney Institute has been around for like 25 years, and they have been sharing their ideas on how to run a business with different guests. And recently, they've been working with sports clients, most specifically in the NFL and professional teams. But recently, they are working with colleges. One particular would be Arizona State, who they have worked with over the past year a lot. They've also worked with Michigan State, Tennessee, Auburn, and beginning this month, North Carolina. The feedback that Arizona State has been getting has really been astonishing. The first thing that Disney really came in and helped out with was making sure their fans were the main priority, which had sort of gone away from Arizona State lately. Customers used to be thought of sort of as a hindrance, and now the mentality is just completely different. One of the changes is outside their stadium for football, they would sell mini helmets. They wouldn't allow the customers to bring them into the stadium, so they would have to go back to the car. It would make it a hassle for customers, obviously. That's one of the changes they made right away. And then the second thing Disney really came in and stressed was making sure the employees knew what was happening before it was released, so the employees of the school and the athletic department. And they have seen that this really helps. I mean, they have more meetings in-house, and it sort of just generates a better vibe within the offices. And it's interesting to see how they're evolving into the world of sports now and really just helping any businesses out there.
Because there's nobody who does customer service better than Disney. So what is hiding behind the castle walls is another question. But, what's out on the street at Disney World and Disneyland is just, it's incredible that a park can be run so efficiently and so clean.
And that's a great point, because when you visit Disney, you don't talk about the amazing modern technology they have and all that. You talk about the one little experience you had with Cinderella.
Right.
So a second topic I want to talk on today is just sort of sponsorship deals with social media, which is something I never really knew happened. They are actually sponsored by a local firm, B&H Photo. So, I mean, it's sort of finding new ways, new assets for different sponsorship deals. Another example would be the Los Angeles Galaxy Social Hub, and Chevrolet has signed on as its official sponsor of the MLS's club social media. So they're sort of sponsoring their Twitter feed, their Facebook, and their Instagram galleries.
Barcelona is the highest followed sporting organization in the world, which probably surprises a lot of people because you'd think it would be a United States-based organization. But, teams in Europe, in the EPL, and in other leagues, have such a wide range of fan that they're able to really use social media best to their advantage, especially in different time zones, thousands and thousands of miles away.
Right. I think that personally, I love them if they're done right, because you can aggregate response on each platform individually pretty successfully, but it's very difficult to get all that into one place. And I think that's what they effectively do, is aggregate Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, everything that a team has in their social media portfolio. They kind of bring all the stuff into one not so noisy place, and I think they're great.
Yeah, and I think if these start to emerge like we think they might take off, that could be an asset in sponsorship deals that sort of will become, it's going to be needed for the companies who are looking to have these partnerships with different teams and leagues.
And I think second to TV rights, there's probably more eyes on their social media platforms than you see in a stadium. You have 1 million followers on Twitter seeing your 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tweets a day. That's a lot more visibility than 50,000 people in a stadium for 8 games a year. So it's definitely a possibility to see great expansion. As much as I would be irritated to have my social media be bogged down by advertisements, looking at it as a sport media professional, I can understand why this makes sense for sporting organizations.
Thank you, Mike, for presenting on sports marketing. Now we would like to welcome in Dr. Ellen Staurowsky to talk to us a little bit about the Rutgers scandal. Dr. S is a Drexel professor with extensive knowledge of the college sports industry, lots of background in research and scholarly work. All right, so thank you, Dr. S, for joining us today. We'll start off with a couple quick questions about the Rutgers situation, because how could we ever stop talking about that? As we all know, Mike Rice got fired for his behavior in practice. Tim Pernetti, the athletic director, got fired afterwards for his role. And then Eddie Jordan, former NBA head coach, got hired and then lied about having a degree at Rutgers. And then Julie Herman was hired as athletic director. So interesting situation going on there. So just any quick thoughts from you about the situation, about Herman's hiring specifically?
Oh my. Rutgers, I think, has really found itself in a very difficult situation given the accumulating issues associated with their athletic department and the impending move to the Big Ten. I think the combination of those things is really creating a series of challenges for them that it will be interesting to see how they overcome that in the future. I think in terms of Julie Herman and the issues associated with her abuse of athletes earlier in her career, I wonder if it might have been possible to have dealt with that a little bit differently. Would it have made a difference if she had been forthcoming, or if the search committee had been forthcoming about what had happened 17 years ago, and whether that could have been a platform to justify her hiring? Yesterday in the press conference, she positioned it that way. You know, she was talking about the fact that she felt like she was an ideal candidate because she had gone through it at very, very early in her career. But of course, she was saying that well after there was so much public criticism because this had not been disclosed. So I think her situation is a little bit different from Mike Rice's, from the standpoint that there was so much physical evidence to show what had happened in these practices, and so severe in many ways. So I think she is a little bit different in that regard, but I think it's the character issue that really has become the hurdle. Did she disclose this to the search committee, or could she have been more forthcoming? Those kinds of questions are things that, even with Rutgers responding, those questions still linger in the air, and there's still an impression that there's a character issue. So I think that's something that is going to be problematic for some time to come.
I think you bring up a good point with the time in between, the media and the public finding out about her past and then this press conference. I mean, the press conference, I thought it was decent. It was well done in that, she spun it to make it not look so bad. They did the classic PR, not using a podium, so it was like, here I am to the world. But the lag time between that is very curious. And then, of course, the whole I don't know if it was an attempted cover-up, but the not bringing up the past from the beginning and acknowledging that it was there. Obviously, interesting there. As of right now, it looks like she may be staying on board. It's still up in the air. Do you think it would be right for her to stay? What direction do you think that Rutgers should go in?
From a practical perspective, we have a situation where Rutgers, it appears, would be obligated to fulfill their contract with her. And the $2.5 million or more is something that I think is creating an issue in terms of how best to handle the situation. From a public accountability point of view, what administrators there are going to be having to deal with the question from a public interest point of view about having to pay out $2.5 million to someone who never worked there. So whether that's an impediment to doing the right thing, I think it becomes very problematic. Secondarily, we've got the situation where we have an unstable athletic department that has distinguished itself because of all of these hirings and firings, leaving them in a vulnerable situation as they move into the future. And we're now in June with an approaching academic year upcoming. So they're wanting to stabilize that athletic department and move on. And then, of course, we have the whole question about Julie Herman herself. We know that there are politicians in the state of New Jersey, journalists, alums, other people who object to her keeping the job, or who have been asking for her to step away from it graciously, and who threaten, in terms of alums, threatening never to give again because of this. So, if she stays on, and it's beginning to look like, from all indications, that she is going to be staying on, then her biggest hurdle is going to be having to win over so many various constituencies who harbor genuine questions about her ability to lead. So under that intense media spotlight, she's going to have to lead this university into the Big Ten, and with people watching every move she makes. But having said that, if she prevails, she will be golden. So there would be a reward for her if she is able to navigate all of this successfully and come out on the other side.
Brought up the politics with Herman herself, but then also if they were to go ahead and fire Herman, it would be, I personally think it would be very hard to justify keeping President Barchi on, because it's one thing to overlook the Mike Rice situation, but it's another to then mess up the incoming hire. So, I mean, obviously as a school president and everything he's done with the medical school, there's a lot of politics in that.
It was this whole discussion about the position that the former chancellor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, took, Holden Clark. Upon his departure, he talked about the fact that he didn't believe the college presidents really could control athletics and that they should be handed back to athletic directors, and the athletic directors should be fired or fired on the basis of whether or not their programs were in control. And his argument was that the enterprise is just so complex that it's really not surprising that presidents find themselves in these situations. Amy Perko from the Knight Commission, the executive director of the Knight Commission, came back and said, well, why is it that we would expect a president to be accountable for what goes on across an entire complex campus, from, physics labs to culinary arts institutes to people operating in music, and yet somehow right at the door of the athletic department, somehow that accountability would disappear. And I kind of appreciate both sides of the discussion. I think the one thing, though, which Thorpe is right about, is the fact that athletic departments have become such a freestanding entity in its association with higher education that I think his observations do warrant some consideration, especially given the fact that every poll that has been taken of college presidents over the past decade and a half suggests that they all feel like they've got something which they can't control. So I think it's a real dilemma for presidents who want to do this right. But my sense is that Thorpe would probably have a fair amount of empathy and sympathy for Barchi. Even with that said, Barchi is in charge of this university, and things clearly have not gone well.
Yeah, when things go wrong, everybody's going to look to the top, but you see it in business in the United States. I guess it's just how it works, obviously they have control over it, but whether they can oversee all of it on a daily basis is a totally different thing. So one last thing on Rutgers. If Herman were to stay on, which looks likely right now, since she was touting her June 17th, I believe, start date, what do you think Rutgers needs to do going forward to kind of put this PR nightmare behind them and, make a smooth or relatively smooth transition into the Big Ten?
Number one, absolutely no more mistakes. Start.
Sounds simple, but
it does, deceptively so. I think there would have to be a serious conversation internally along the lines of, do we have anything else out there working that is going to blow up on us? They had better find it out now and disarm it in the event there is something there. So I think that's number one. I think number two, they need a quiet summer. I think that we can't have, discontented assistant coaches or assistant coaches being mistreated possibly, when they're working summer camps and so forth. I think that summer has to be quiet, and there needs to be a lot of internal building of trust, and also the forging of a unified front in terms of how to move forward. And I think that Penn State does provide a bit of illustration as to how to do that. When Bill O'Brien came in, his relationship with other coaches in the department, that was a conscious decision on his part to get those other coaches to be on board. And then, there was a unified front in terms of athletes, so that they were really representing a total perspective on what they wanted the athletic department to be as they moved forward. And I think that Herman is going to have her work cut out for her in terms of creating a similar kind of mindset. She was talking the other day about how the athletes were so hurt by this because their experience had been so contrary to some of the public perception and not so much on the basketball team, but throughout the athletic department, that there were so many other athletes involved in this program whose experience was not being represented by what was going on, but it was being disrupted in a very negative way. So it sounds like there are many places within the athletic department to get that kind of support, but she's going to have to mobilize that and have them have full faith in her that she's going to be able to pull this off.
Right. I think if there's one thing going forward in terms of media coverage that the quiet summer could help is that, we're not talking about a coach that'll be on the sideline who, the media will have a chance to talk about every single game. It'll be, after the first week of football, I think it'll start to quiet as long as they stay quiet that in terms of rules and everything like that. I think it'll start to die out because you can only bring up the athletic director so much in a broadcast and everything.
Well, and it is interesting. This is the university that had to deal with the whole IMIS women's basketball situation, and of course they were not the wrongdoers in that, right? So, but it was still this enormous media crisis. So I've been wondering whether or not some of that experience might be brought to bear in terms of how to move this forward in a way that's going to get them beyond this moment. But I just don't know if the parties involved have moved on from that incident, or whether or not it's going to be helpful. But I think that's what they're going to have to draw upon, is that kind of experience to get them.
All right. Thank you for joining us, Dr. S. That's it for this week's Sports Biz Report. Check back next week and hope to see everybody out at our 3v3 soccer tournament on Saturday at Buckley. Free Ritas and free Philly soft pretzels. Socks to Sock is we're taking the cup. See you guys next week.